Clearly, there's no shortage of doom and gloom and hype and everything in the media about AI and agentic AI. But it's also creating a lot of ethical nightmares, challenges. Today, we'll talk about that and what that means. So let's jump right in. All right, welcome back to What's the Buzz, where leaders share how they have turned hype into outcome. Today, we'll talk about how you can address AI's ethical nightmare challenges. And who better to talk about it than someone who's actually just written a new book about that? Reid Blackman. Hey, Reid, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me. What an exciting intro. Like
Thank
the
you.
video, all the note, the music. So professional.
Thank you. You've been on the show at the end of 2022, which seems like a lifetime ago. Definitely in AI terms. But maybe for those of our listeners and viewers in the audience who are not familiar with you, maybe can you share a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Virtue. Back in 2022, I came on because I had just published a book called Ethical Machines with Harvard Business Review. I, for the past 6+ years, have been advising organizations, mostly in the Fortune 500, on how to avoid what I would call now the ethical nightmares of AI, or the ethical, reputational, regulatory, and legal risks of AI, that sort of thing. So mostly advising those companies, do a lot of keynote speaking, wrote this new book. The other thing is that, by way of background, I'm not a technologist by background. My PhD is in philosophy. I was a philosophy professor for 10 years, specializing in ethics. So my background is philosophy, not data science, computer science, etc.
Awesome, wonderful. And if I think of the term having a spiky point of view, quite honestly, you're one of the first people that come to mind. So I really appreciate you bringing this topic to people's minds and forefront with a little bit of an edge. So I'm excited for our conversation today.
Sharp edge.
Awesome,
Lots
wonderful.
of edge.
Yeah, hey, that's what you need these days to stand out. So folks, if you're in the audience, if you're just joining, drop a comment in the chat where you're joining us from. I'm always curious to see how global our audience is. And if you want to find out how you can prepare your teams for the next generation of AI readiness, consider picking up a copy of my book called The Human Agentic AI Edge. That's on Amazon and everywhere else you can get your books online, paperback, ebook, audiobook. Now, with that out of the way, Reid, should we play a little game to kick things off?
Let's do it. We got the button.
Okay, so here we go. Exactly. There's the button. So when I press the button, you'll see the wheels spinning. And when they stop turning, I would like for you to answer with the first thing that comes to mind and why in your own words. And to make it a little more interesting, you only have 60 seconds. Okay, are you ready?
All right, let's do it. No enemies.
Okay, here we go. If AI were a sports car, what would it be? 60 seconds on the clock.
Oh, go. Man, it would be a Lamborghini without brakes.
Ha! Why that?
Well, because we know how to build these things, we know how to stitch these things together, but we don't really know how to control them very well. So a car that can go extremely fast, but we don't necessarily have the requisite safety equipment like brakes on a car.
I like that. It's very easy if you go down the quarter mile, just straight. But we know life in business has a lot of curves and turns. So we need to know how we can brake and steer. So, which helps us steer the conversation. Obviously, a lot has happened since you were on the show last time in November 22, and it feels like the industry keeps riding the AI hype cycle like a roller coaster, up and down and super fast. And it's no longer just AI everywhere, but now we're talking about agentic AI everywhere. Again, kind of like my book too. But what ethical challenges do you see that introduces now for organizations and even for society as a whole?
Yeah. Okay. So there's obviously a lot to say here. One thing is going to depend upon what you think about, how you think about AI agents, what they are. So I'll give a very quick articulation of how I think about them. Two simple conditions. Number one, it's an LLM, typically, at least now, an LLM in the center that you interact with. And number one, the first condition is that it's connected to other tools. So it could be the internet, it could be other, say, narrow AIs or other generative AIs. It could be connected to enterprise software, databases, so on and so forth. So it's going to be connected to those things. And then the second condition for being an agent is that instead of you saying, hey, listen, I want you to go to narrow, database number 3 and put it through narrow AI number 5, and then also consult with gender AI number 7. And instead of you giving it step by step, you just say, hey, here's what I want to do. And it, quote unquote, figures out by itself, autonomously, so to speak, how this should go. And then it, goes and does the thing. So you don't give it step by step instructions, you give it the goal. So that's how I think about an agent. It's an LLM connected to a bunch of tools, and it has some degree of autonomy in how it pursues the user specified goal. Okay. Lots of places for things to go wrong. So first of all, we already have all the stuff that besets narrow AI and generative AI. So you still have things like biased outputs, privacy violations, including IP violations, copyright violations. You still have hallucinations. All that stuff still applies. You also have some other things, because we're getting really complex and messy here because we're connected to all these different things. So I'll highlight 3 things that where things potentially go sideways, new nightmares. Number 1, you have what you can call cascading failures or a snowball effect. So, we're talking about big systems here. So this thing does something wrong, and then it passes on the information to the next thing, and that amplifies the error, and then it goes to the next thing and it amplifies the error. So with all these systems interconnected, and if one of them sort of gets the wrong answer, goes sideways ethically or otherwise in some way, it's going to echo throughout the system until you get really big bad stuff. So you can think about things like, I like to think about this sort of, I don't know. I actually don't know how if there's a stock market crash, like the flash crash, you could have a sort of, if you like, ethical flash crash where something goes wrong over here and then it just resounds throughout the system. So that's one source of errors. It's called cascading failures. A second kind of problem is systemic or emergent risks. So the way that I like to think about this is, suppose you've got a bunch of basketball players and they're each good basketball players. No problems with any of them. They're not making errors, let's say. But there's something about the way they play. This one plays a really fast game. This one plays a really slow game. This one is all about passing. This one is not. And for whatever reason, even though they're individually good players, they don't play well together. They don't make for a good team. And you can have the same thing with agentic AI, where all the tools to which it's connected, they're all on the sort of ethical, reputational, brand, legal, up and up. But something about how your agent stitches them together, it doesn't make for a good team. And so you wind up with these emergent risks. And then the last thing that I'll say is this autonomy bit. So autonomy is not sort of a risk unto itself. It's that it exacerbates all the other problems. Because when AI creates biased outputs, privacy violations, hallucinates, there are cascading failures, there are systemic or emergent risks. It does it at tremendous speed and scale. And if the AI is autonomous and you say, go do the thing, and you go walk away and you've come back and has been doing the things because it's autonomous, and it turns out that one or more of those errors, ethical, reputational, et cetera, have occurred, you're in trouble. So autonomy sort of pours gasoline on the other ethical and reputational fires.
Also sounds like if you have increasing levels of autonomy, there are fewer humans in the loop or aware of what is actually happening or being able to step in, right? So to your point, multiplying or exponentially growing the risk of failure in that system, not just additive, but like multiplied.
Exponential. Yeah, it becomes exponential, and the human in the loop strategy breaks down. So human in the loop, as probably your audience knows, a human in the loop is meant to stand between, if you like, the AI outputs and the outcome, because the human takes the outputs, reviews it, like let's say it's a very simple broken bone identifier for radiologists, right? So the radiologist is the human in the loop. She says, yeah, that's legit. That really is broken, or actually the AI is mistaken here, and then prescribes whatever she prescribes, and that's the outcome. But when you have, it already begins to be difficult with generative AI, but with agentic AI, let alone multi-agentic AI, when you have agents talking to each other, human in the loop really begins to break down, because imagine this sort of mountain of data and decision points made by the AI. And then you go to, Sam in accounting and you say, hey, Sam, validate that. Is that cool? Sam can't do that. Sam can't handle that amount of data and that quantity of decision at the speed at which they were delivered and the speed at which Sam is supposed to validate. It's not possible. So one thing that we see with agentic AI and multi-agentic AI is that the human in the loop strategy for risk mitigation really begins to just completely fall apart.
So what's the answer then?
Oh, there's lots of things to say here. I mean, we still need some kind of, certainly some kind of oversight, some kind of validation. I mean, people use other acronyms now. It have for a while, like human over the loop, human, in charge of the loop, human behind the loop, ahead of the loop. There's all sorts of crazy places. There's the short of it though is that I don't think that there's one generic answer of here's what you do then. It's for this particular generative AI solution, this particular agentic solution, this particular multi-agentic solution. It's how do we identify how things could go sideways? What can we do now to decrease the likelihood of those things going sideways? And what can we do now to monitor the thing once it's in the wild so that if it does start to go sideways, we can intervene in the right kind of way? And
Right.
the answer to who should be doing what, when, how, it must vary on a per use basis, a per use case basis.
Mhm.
It can't be sort of decided ahead of time because the context in which you could use an agentic system.
So what do you do then?
Yeah, so I don't think there is the thing to do. It's not like, with all these different kinds of agents, with all the different contexts of deployment, there's the way that you avoid the risks that a human in the loop might play in, say, narrow AI. The issue is that there's lots of different ways that things can go sideways. There's lots of different things that we can do to decrease the likelihood of it, and there's lots of different things that we can do to monitor the AI. And so, to me, the question is not what's the thing, what's the silver bullet if it's not a human in the loop. Rather, it's for this particular use case, for this particular context of deployment, what's the set of things that we can do in order to decrease the likelihood of really bad outcomes. And in some cases, that might be a data, if you like, a data scientific solution. It might be someone, downstream of the data scientist, like a marketing person or a person in HR using the tool. It might be some combination. Usually, will be some combination of that and more. And so, I just think that when it comes to human in the loop, it's not a panacea. It's not the thing that's always going to fix your problem by any means. It's just going to, in many cases, heap a level of responsibility on someone that it's not fair to give them, and then things will break down.
So it sounds like definitely take a deliberate approach. Look at the risk of what is what is the task, what is the risk involved, anyways, as it is, and then when you layer agentic AI on top of it, how does that risk change? And is it even feasible to automate it? Is it feasible to have a human in the loop and make decisions more along
Yeah,
those?
I mean, yeah, that's exactly right. And even more generally, I think the key thing in the era of agentic AI is what does it look like to do that kind of problem solving at scale? I think that's the question that we have to wrestle with. Because I don't think it's a matter of, and I'm sure we'll talk about this some more, but it's not just a matter of, oh, just do the things or do the thing.
Yeah.
It's okay, in each particular agent that you're developing, let's solve the problem of what are the various things that we can do to decrease the likelihood of various kinds of nightmares occurring.
Mm-hmm. So hey, I've been obviously following your content for a number of years, and I really love the perspective that you bring to that topic of not just responsible AI, but really the ethical piece of it. And I'm sure you purposefully call it ethics as opposed to this broader term of responsible AI. But companies have been standing up ethics committees. They've been standing up responsible AI programs. But from what I see and keep hearing from you, it seems that something's broken. What are you seeing? What's really changed when it comes to AI ethics and governance and responsible AI?
Yeah, okay. So there's tons to say here. Actually, there's a whole chapter of my book where I sort of tear apart what I call the standard approach to responsible AI or AI ethics. And yeah, we could talk about the difference of AI ethics versus responsible AI, but it's sort of all in the same kind of mix. You can also call it AI governance,
Mhm.
trustworthy AI, that sort of thing. Anyway, so there's a standard approach that I think is totally broken, and there's a couple of things going on here. So the standard approach to responsible AI is very top down and very policy driven. So it roughly looks like this. You get some executives together, you create something like an AI ethics statement, where you talk about you're committed to privacy and fairness and transparency and accountability and that sort of thing. That ultimately gets those values get two things happen to those values. Number one, they get translated into procedures. So what does it mean to be, committed to fairness? Well, we'll check for bias in our models throughout the AI lifecycle. What does it mean to be transparent? Well, if we should use an AI in a customer interaction, we'll tell them, we'll disclose to them that an AI was used. So you translate it all to the procedures, and the other thing is that the values get some way or other embedded in your enterprise risk policy. Now, one of the big problems with this, because it requires an enterprise-wide policy, that's the approach. And if you're talking with Fortune 500 companies, this is going to take forever, at least a year. A year is the fastest that you're going to get an enterprise-wide, say, AI risk policy passed. And once it's passed, great, you can celebrate for half a second, and now you have to implement because no one cares about your policy. It's not like your employees wake up with a thirst to read the new policy. And so now you've got to implement that policy, and that's going to take, you know, years, at least 6 months for a department. And if you're talking about organizations that span hundreds of markets and dozens of countries, this is a long implementation roadmap. Meanwhile, the technology AI is leaping ahead. So you pass your AI policy on narrow AI, great. Oh no, generative AI just came out. You finally passed your policy on generative AI. Oh my God, now it's AI agents.
Yep.
You considered AI agents, but not multi-agentic AI. Uh-oh, what do we do now? And especially because the technology keeps changing. What your policy say bans in one instance, 1 year, they might not want to ban the next year because the technology has changed such that it's now safer and we don't need the ban anymore. So for instance, if there are monitoring agents, there's techniques and software that doesn't exist next year, that doesn't exist now, it's going to be way safer to deploy them next year as opposed to now. And your policy can't really speak to that and accept an extremely general, generic way. So you take forever to pass this policy. Then you're trying to implement a policy, but the policy is kind of stale and dated and dead. And so you implement the policy, but the policy is out of date. So get the C-suite back in and the board back in and update the policy. This is just a chaotic nightmare where you're never actually getting to robust nightmare avoidance. And so that's one big problem with the timeline. That's one reason why it's crumbling. The other reason that it's crumbling is that you take all these things, you translate all the values to procedures, and given the complexity of agentic systems, especially, half of those procedures don't apply anymore. Half of them do, and there's another, if you like, there's another 10, 50, whatever procedures that you do need to go through with this agentic system that are not mentioned in the policy. So that never works. And the other thing is that you never know if you're successful with this procedure-based first approach, because what does success look like? Did you achieve fair outcomes? Well, I don't know. We did the things. We did the procedures, right? But did the procedures make it a fair outcome, or a privacy respecting outcome, or a transparency respecting outcome? I don't know. We did the things. You told us that the values just are procedures. We did the procedures, and so that's it. And so it's not outcome oriented. You don't know what success looks like. It's too slow to implement. It's just the whole thing's a mess.
Yeah, and it's always hard to put a price tag on something that hasn't happened, right? Risk avoidance is a lot harder to estimate than if something materializes. So it sounds like there's a lot of talk, a lot of red tape, a lot of back and forth between all the different departments and stakeholders and players to go through. Then you finally roll it out, and by the time the world has moved on, and we're talking next things. We're always in this iterative mode of catch up. And hey, here's something new, and we need to think about this and roll it out.
Yeah.
Now, you talk about this very purposefully in terms of nightmares, and maybe if you hold up your book, we can all get a look at the cover of it. So that's what it looks like, right? The Ethical Nightmare Challenge. It's been out for a couple of weeks now, so I'm super excited to get some time with you to talk about this. But why specifically do you talk about this as nightmares?
There's a lot of reasons. I have a chapter called "Why I Like Nightmares," and you should too. So when you talk about values, like I just said, they're sort of very abstract. It's not, if I ask you to tell me what heaven looks like, we're not very good at explaining what heaven looks like. If I ask you, what are some hellscape scenarios, you can do those. We're very experienced talking about nightmare scenarios. We have all of history. We have the news. We have books and film and TV and et cetera, et cetera. So we have a deep familiarity with nightmares. This means that we can make them concrete and specific and vivid. They're also emotionally engaging, so they're motivating. They carry a level of urgency that values doesn't. If you don't live up to your values, sort of like, or not fully, you say, well, we're doing the best we can. It's hard. But if you run into a nightmare, that's sort of, you don't say, oh well, you can run into nightmares sometimes. The whole, oh my God, no, we really got to avoid nightmares. So I like nightmares because they are concrete specifications of outcomes, specifically outcomes that you want to avoid. you can build strategies and tactics around avoiding those nightmares in a way that you don't really build strategies around abstract values like fairness. They're very shareable. I can tell you, say, a nightmare of mine, and you're going to get it in a way that you might not get if I just say, I'm for fairness. Okay, but the KKK says they're for fairness too, but they have a very different conception. So when you say you're for fairness, what do you mean? um, Nightmares are much more relatable in that way. They're also they're relevant to organizations. You could specify what's organization relevant nightmares. So I'm not asking for um, what's your particular, your personal nightmare, but rather for the organization for which you work. What are some ethical and reputational and legal nightmares that your organization can run into? That's pretty grabbable. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up, is that everyone can speak the language of nightmares. So maybe you're a data scientist, maybe you're in HR, maybe you're in marketing, maybe you're in product. If I say, so tell me some, kinds of nightmare scenarios that could result if this thing goes sideways, everyone gets that. And if everybody gets that, now the data scientist can talk to Mark and HR fruitfully in a way that they couldn't necessarily earlier if they said, well, we're for fairness. And then you can see, data scientists like, what is that? What do you mean by that? But I think the language of nightmares it's sort of a touchstone that everyone can relate to, and so they can have conversations with each other, which is the kind of thing that enables collaboration.
But hey, at a time when there's so much talk about opportunities and a ideally bright future on one end,
Yeah.
on the other, the super dystopian, everything is going downhill and will erase humankind.
Yeah.
Doesn't the term nightmare, ethical nightmare, specifically, fuel this angst, this fear of something going wrong?
Yeah.
Isn't it leaving out that opportunity of what the technology can actually do?
Couple of things. So yeah, I'm not a pessimist. I don't think the sky is falling. I think it can fall if we don't do things the right way. So this is me saying, let's face the problems head on. I mean, I don't think we get to avoid the nightmares and we get to the promised end of all this opportunity if we just close our eyes to the nightmares. No, nothing bad here, nothing to see here. Let's just think about the opportunity. That's a really bad way. That's a way for things to go really bad. So the other thing is that two things. One, the book is focused on making sure that the nightmares that you specify are organizationally relevant, which means that you can actually do something about it. So if you're worried about, AGI, artificial general intelligence, taking over and extinguishing humanity, well, you work in insurance. There's nothing there's nothing your insurance company's going to do about it. There's nothing that your CPG company's going to do about it. There's nothing your healthcare company's going to do about it. It's just if that's going to happen, it's beyond the purview of the organization's nightmare. That's sort of like humanity's nightmares, as opposed to something that's the organization's nightmares. That's one thing to say. Another thing to say is that I think people are already anxious and fearful of not just the complete doomsday scenarios, but lots of other sort of, like, if you like, middle ranged bad things happening, like discriminating against people at scale, creating reports for clients that contain lots of hallucinated material, um, things going sideways in some massive way that you didn't see coming at all and didn't have the tools with which to see it. And I think people are anxious about that stuff. And the answer is not to let's just not focus on the anxiety producing stuff. Let's just focus on the good stuff. Is silly. I think we justifiably quell anxiety by facing the problem head on and then problem solving. We can solve this problem. We can reduce the likelihood of catastrophe here. I'll say one last thing. Suppose someone said, hey, listen, we're going to engage in developing nuclear technology. But listen, we can blow up humanity. And someone were to say, oh, don't focus on that. Focus on all the opportunity that nuclear has to. It's like, are you out of your mind? You need safety.
Right.
You
Yes.
need you. That's insane.
Yes.
That's obviously an insane view. So you need safety. You need to attack the problem head on, so that you can take advantage of the opportunity. So this is not a eliminate all risk by not pursuing AI. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. I think pursue all the cool things. Make sure you don't blow up things, whether it's people, your brand, or both. By then in the book I specify a method for doing such a thing, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, so that's my short answer to why focus on the nightmares. I think it's compelling in the right kind of way.
Yeah, I mean, I can absolutely get behind that. Personally, I see myself as a techno pragmatist. Yes, there's lots of opportunity, but there are risks in the truth is somewhere in the middle, and we need to find a way
Yeah.
to make the technology practical without exposing everybody else to unreasonable amounts of risks or
Yeah.
unmitigatable
Yeah.
risk in that sense. Now, Reid, we're getting close to the end of the show, and I was wondering if you can summarize the key 3 takeaways for our audience today. We covered a lot of ground about ethical nightmares.
Yeah.
What are the 3 things that stick?
I'd say one of those things is that the AI risk landscape is getting insanely complex, diabolically complex, as I call it in the book. The move from narrow to generative to agentic AI are big leaps in the AI risk landscape. And when you get to multi-agentic AI, we're really talking about in the book I call it an AI risk clusterfuck.
Yeah.
So and that one big takeaway is the AI risk landscape is getting crazy. Takeaway 2, the standard approach for dealing with AI risk, responsible AI ethics approach, et cetera, the kind that I've developed over the past 6+ years, the kind that the big 4 have developed. I've advised 3 of the 4 big 4, so I know exactly what they're doing. Any consultant who's been doing the same kind of approach, I don't think we're necessarily, me and my colleagues and and competitors deserve blame. We just didn't know what was coming. But it's broken. It's not the right way of doing it anymore. And anyone who's trying to sort of sell you that sort of standard way of doing responsible AI, I think they're setting you up for failure. The third and last thing, which is less a takeaway because we didn't talk about it too much, but it's something like, and this is what I try to articulate in the book, is whatever the solution looks like, and I have my own, the ethical nightmare challenge is my solution, but whatever the solution looks like, it has to be something that can be rapidly implemented and scaled. If you can't rapidly engage in ethical, reputational, legal nightmare avoidance, then either you're not going to innovate at all because you're going to be too scared, or you're going to innovate totally recklessly. And so the ethical nightmare challenge is my solution for rapid, scalable governance, responsible AI ethics, AI ethical risk management. But even if you don't use mine, you've got to find something that can move at the pace at which AI evolved and is implemented and scaled.
To me, that's really the big piece, the last one, right? It's moving incredibly fast. Where blazing through all these different step scale innovations, and it's not just a matter of keeping up, but really also keeping pace with it. So, Reid,
Yep.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. It's always a pleasure talking to you and learning what you're seeing around ethical AI, responsible AI. Folks, if you're in the audience, make sure to check out Reid's book, The Ethical Nightmare Challenge, that's out now. And yeah, thank you so much for joining, Reid. Really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Folks in the audience, see you next time for another episode of What's the Buzz. Bye-bye.